Learners, you're also required to know the impact of the Basic Conditions Employment Act on business operations. Now again, when we speak about impact, or when you're required to answer a question on impact, then you need to look at two things. The first one is the advantages of whatever act they are referring to. Now the advantages, they can also speak about the positives. And the second one is the disadvantages or the negatives. So just remember, whenever you're required to refer to the impact or to discuss or evaluate the impact, the emphasis would be on the advantages and disadvantages. So let's look at the advantages of the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. Now there are many advantages, but I'm just going to refer to 4 or 5 of them. The first one is that additional compensation the worker will receive for any work done overtime, work on public holidays, and also work on Sundays. So simply means that the Act made it possible that if anybody works overtime, that person must receive additional compensation. It means he's going to earn extra income. Obviously, that is an advantage for the employee. Another advantage is that the Act stipulates quite clearly that you are limited to work 45 hours per week if it is a 5-day week. So it restricts you to work normal hours, 9 hours a day. And certainly that's another advantage, because you can then use your other time for leisure purposes or just to relax. Another advantage of the Basic Conditions of Employment Act is that after you've worked for 5 solid hours, you are entitled to 1 hour meal interval. So by law, you are not required, or you're not supposed to work longer than 5 hours without having a 1 hour lunch break. Now you can negotiate with your employee to break that 1 hour up into a lunch break and a tea time, but that must amount to a total of 60 minutes. So you could have 40 minutes lunch break and a 20-minute tea break. Another advantage of the Basic Conditions of Employment Act is that when you work on a Sunday, now this specifically if Sunday is not a normal working day for you, if you normally earn 100 Rand per hour during the week, and your boss asks you to work overtime on a Sunday, by law he is required to pay you 200 Rand per hour. So certainly that's another advantage, because you go home with more salary or more income. If we look at the disadvantages of the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, firstly, it says that to ensure that all employees has got a contract. Now that's a requirement. If you are employed, you must sign an agreement between you and the employer. And that is known as your contract, and it could be time consuming to compile that contract for each employee. Another disadvantage of the BCEA Act is that the employee is restricted to a maximum number of hours that workers may work overtime. You will recall we said that an employee cannot work longer than 3 hours per day, and he may not work longer than 10 hours per week. Now obviously that restricts the employer from producing more goods if he cannot have workers working more overtime. Another disadvantage is that it could be very costly for the business for them to adhere to all the processes and procedures as stipulated in the Act. And so whilst they could be busy with some other productive activities, they need to adhere to that administrative functions of the Act, and that could be very costly for the business. And then another disadvantage is that all businesses are required to operate within the framework of the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. Now, if the business operates outside of that framework, there are penalties that they will be imposed upon them. It could also be fines, and obviously that will impact on the profitability of the business. And then another disadvantage of the Act states quite clearly that you cannot make use of cheap labor. The Act also stipulates some minimum wages that must be paid. And obviously, if there are minimum standard of wages that needs to be paid out, it influences the profitability. Business will have more expenses, and ultimately the business will also make less profit. So that in a nutshell refers to the advantages and disadvantages of the Basic Conditions of Employment Act.